must know a poem or something.
Yes.
Thank everybody you stepped on together.
Well, I'd like to say I think this started when I was very little. My family was, I don't know.
Yeah, what
as
can
I
you
said,
say about your family?
What can I say? I haven't really prepared a speech, and I just like to say it's a good thing there's a lot of food here tonight for Jay. No, for Jay.
Oh, for Jay.
Thank you. And I have to go cut something right now, so Kathy, if you would please take the mic.
What can I give him for as I am? If I were a shepherd, I'd give him a lamb. If I were a wise man, I'd do my part.
Day. When you when you see the cake, you'll also know. What we'd like to do at this time is invite anyone or everyone to come up to this open microphone, now that I've figured out how to turn it on, and share with us a story, a memory perhaps. It doesn't have to be mushy. It doesn't even have to be funny. It can be from the heart. And in fact, if you don't have one, you're invited to even make one up. So we want to have a little fun with this. We don't want to embarrass anybody. So you may have to change the names to protect the innocent. But we all know who you're talking about, so we'll carry on. And before I kind of turn the mic over here, I would like to share something with you. You know, we have all remarked at how bright Jay is and how astute she is, and how she always seems to have the insight into what's going on around us. I mean, I know for a fact when she comes to visit us, she's up early in the morning, and by the time I even get up, she's done 2 New York Times crossword puzzles. I think that's pretty good. But you know, this goes way back in her history when she was just a young college student. She was actually in a business school, and she was learning to do secretarial work, stenography, typing, things of that nature, and decided that she would go out and look for a job. So this was down in Southern California, and industry was growing all around at that point in time, and she picks a couple of businesses out of the phone book and decided to go for a job interview. And she talked to the secretary outside, and she said, now, Miss Andrew, you will be interviewing with Mr. Smith, and I need to tell you a little bit about Mr. Smith. He is a war veteran, and unfortunately he was in an accident in the war and badly burned. But he's okay, and he survived. The only thing is that he has no ears. And Jay kind of wrinkled her brow a little bit and said, okay, she cataloged that, no ears. And the secretary then said, and all of us around here understand that he's quite sensitive about that. So we never mention it to him. So Jay cataloged that, okay, don't mention ears. So the secretary tells her, now, you're going to be the third person that goes into this interview today. And so if you'll just go have a seat in this other office, I'll come and get you. So Jay goes over, and they offer her a cup of coffee, and she sits very properly and studies her lines and goes over her resume and so forth. So she says everything exactly right. And she can kind of overhear what's going on, but decides now she doesn't want to be involved in any office politics here. So the first applicant comes in and goes in and sits down with Mr. Smith, and as it turns out, this was a very sharp young man at the time looking for a job in this company. And Mr. Smith was very impressed with this gentleman, his credentials, his appearance, his demeanor, the way he answered the questions, I mean, his entire grasp of the business and the type of work he might be doing there. So Mr. Smith asked him, okay, young man, you seem to check out pretty well here. But let me ask you, do you notice anything unusual about me? And this was a bright young man and very observant, and he wanted the potential future boss to know that. And he said, well, yes, sir, you don't have any ears. And Mr. Smith absolutely went ballistic. I mean, he got angry, he pounded on the table, and he practically came across the desk at this applicant and told him to leave the room immediately. So that was sort of the end of the first applicant. The second individual comes in, a young lady this time, again with impeccable credentials and a great capability, did very well in the typing and steno tests. And so Mr. Smith begins that interview. And that too goes very, very well. So So Smith thinking, well, it's just okay that the first guy didn't make it because this is a very fine applicant. And so at the close of the interview, he said, well, young lady, you've impressed me a great deal. Now, tell me something. Is there anything about me that's unusual that comes to your attention or to your notice? She wasn't quite sure how to answer the question. She sort of looked around the room, and she looked out the window for a moment, and he cleared his throat, showing that he was sort of waiting for an answer. And she said, well, yes, sir. As a matter of fact, it did occur to me that you don't have any ears. And Smith reacted in the same way that he did for the first applicant, and this poor, dejected young lady then left the room. Then it was Jay's turn. So she's asked by the secretary to come into the office. She sits down. She obviously also had great credentials, and she had been sort of studying this whole thing for the last hour or so, so she had formulated her answers just right. She kind of knew what to do and what to say. The interview went extremely well. And finally, Mr. Smith said, well, Miss Andrew, now, this was a very good interview, and you seem to be a viable candidate for this job. But tell me something. Do you notice anything unusual about me? And she looked at him and she said, well, yes, sir. You wear contact lenses. And he looked at her and he said, how did you know I wear contact lenses? And she said, well, sir, you couldn't wear regular glasses. You don't have any ears. So we know Jay is mentally sound, and she always has been very observant and very astute. One last quick story, and then I'll turn this over to somebody else. One of the other things that her family remarks about is the great physical and medical condition that she's in. And she does this because she exercises and she stays active, and she has a checkup on a regular basis. I have it on good authority. And a recent medical checkup that she went to, just sort of routine, as she does from time to time, she went in to see the physician, and she's in the doctor's office, and he does blood pressure, and he does heartbeat, and he does all of that. And he says, well, Mr. Sullivan, he said, I think we need to take a couple of extra tests and do some additional things here just to get some other information. He said, I'm going to go out and get prepared for some of these things, and if you'll just wait here for a moment. So she's sitting there in the office, and the door opens, and in walks this black Labrador retriever. And he walks in, and he kind of sniffs around the office, and he looks up at Jay, and he sits down, and he gets up, and he walks around, and he sits down, and he walks around the other side of her, kind of sniffs her feet, and walks around and wags his tail, and he walks out the door. Well, that was interesting. I didn't know they let pets into doctor's offices, but who knows who this old dog belonged to. So she's sitting there quietly waiting for the doctor to return, and the door opens, and in walks this large, fluffy cat. The cat, sort of, as cats do, strutted in as if he owned the place, tail erect, and the back of his little fluffy body, and his nose in the air, and he's kind of walking around the room. He walks over to Jay and gives her one of those cat looks, as if to say, what are you doing in my space? Walked back around the other side of her, walked around the room a couple of times, jumped up on the table, looked her in the eye, threw his head back, jumped off the table, went, wow, and walked out of the room. Well, shortly, the doctor comes back in. He says, well, Mrs. Sullivan, I have got great news for you. You are healthy as a horse. We can find nothing that we need to deal with unusual. And so this concludes your examination today. And the bill is $600. And he hands her this invoice. And Jay says, $600? $600 to tell me there's nothing wrong with me? And he said, well, actually, my bill's only $65. The rest of it is for the lab tests and the CAT scan. Now, if there's anybody else out there that's got a story about Jay they'd like to share with us, please come up to the microphone. Do we have a taker? Someone to break the ice. Okay, great.